Happy New Year! Welcome back to Lovebabz, Love Talk, the second hour. I'm delighted because I get to kick off the new year with Enroue. Happy New Year!
Happy New Year.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
How are you doing this morning?
Listen, every day above ground is a damn good day.
It's the best way to start the day. The best way to start.
I'm good. I'm good.
Good, good.
Ooh. All right. So what are you gonna bring me for the new year?
Well, let's do a little honoring of our where we come from, all our peoples, and then there's a little thing I'll share, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay.
All right. So again, this is for a recognition and an honoring of our ancestors, thanking them for what they have left for us, and then as we thank them for that, we are also stating and claiming that we are using what they left for us. Bàbá tó fún wa ṣe o, bàbá tó fún wa ṣe, bàbá tó fún wa ṣe o, bàbá tó fún wa ṣe, àṣetẹ̀ fún wa là ń lò yìí o, bàbá tó fún wa ṣe. Báyéyé tó fún wa ṣe o, báyéyé tó fún wa ṣe. Báyéyé tó fún wa ṣe o, báyéyé tó fún wa ṣe. Àṣetẹ̀ fún wa là ń lò yìí o, báyéyé tó fún wa ṣe. Ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe o, ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe. Ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe o, ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe. Àṣetẹ̀ fún wa là ń lò yìí o, ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe. Ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe. Ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe. Ìbà Egúngún tó fún wa ṣe.
Shay. It's good. That's how I just want to start my year.
Yes, right. So I was sitting in the woods yesterday, as can often happen, I often do. And I was talking to a friend, and it's a good friend of mine, and we have weekly conversations just around where we're at in our lives and our like healing processes. A good friend, we connect around that. And we started off our time together just with some silence. And earlier in the day, I had been looking at some things that some of my colleagues are doing. I'll just keep that part short. But what it brought up before I had this phone call, before I was out in the woods, is all of these shoulds, like all the like, oh, ooh, I should really be doing this. Oh, if I was really, who I am and what I'm saying, if I'm walking my talk, then I would be doing this. Or like, the shoulds have this other component of the kind of not enoughs, right? That they go hand in hand, so to speak. And so I've been like all wrapped up in that kind of before this conversation. And so in this, when I was in the woods, the repetition of that kind of narrative kind of arose. And what was powerful and what was different is that I was able to simultaneously be in that place. So for me, being in the woods and being in nature keeps me connected to things larger than me. Connects me to the divine, connects me to my ancestors, connects me to like the largeness of life. And it's a place that I can kind of bring either intentionally or unintentionally the struggles, the particular struggles that I'm in, and then kind of bring that into a larger context. Like, oh, how does my worry about this thing, what does it do in the face of this expansiveness of like life and purpose? Not necessarily like the figuring out of it, but just putting it in the context of that kind of larger vision. And so
Mm-hmm.
what was powerful for me in that moment is that I could simultaneously be present, and being in the woods, for me, those questions just don't arise. Like they may come up, but it's like, oh yeah, that's not important. Like that's actually not important for me to worry about. That's not important for me to like feel a certain way about. And it's not an intellectual thing. It's a real feeling shift that happens. Like, oh, the thing that sticks is just like, oh, that's just irrelevant actually. That's a narrative, right? That's an old thing. That's an old hook. And so what was powerful in this moment was I could actually be with the narrative of that hook, of the shoulds. Oh, you're not good enough. If you're really the thing or whatever, you should be doing all these things. You're training, you're learning, right?
Mm.
And so I could feel that narrative while I wasn't pulled into it. And the thing that happened is I actually just started crying. So like I could feel in that moment like my eye like welling up, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I just kind of stayed with being present in between, like simultaneously in a place of feeling really uh, held, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't actually have to have things figured out while the narrative played, and I could kind of feel how deep that narrative um, both kind of felt like it came from outside of me, but was definitely hooked into some inner things. And then the eye kept welling up, and then the little tear formed, and it just ran down my face, and I was like, oh. And I think for the first time, I could feel sad about how deep that hook was. I wasn't sad about the hook, like I'm really not the thing, and no, I really need. It was like, oh, just this like love and compassion that even I had for myself. That hook, like, is so quick and so easy when I'm not grounded. When I'm not oriented to the largeness and the mystery of also what this life is. And it really stayed with me. I mean, it stays with me today. And even as I was telling my wife about it later in the day, like the sadness arose again. Like, oh, it's just heartbreaking, right? It's heartbreaking. I could feel heartbreak at how deep that was in me, that hook, how easy it is. Oh, and I turn a little bit and I look at a thing and it's like, oh, see, no, look what they're doing. Oh, you should be doing that. And it was like, oh, it pulled so quick. And I could just feel compassion and sadness about how deep that is. And so, it's not a done thing, but I think one, it's just a powerful thing that I just experienced literally yesterday, and I wanted to share that. But also, actually, in this, the last conversation we had was also about like, oh, New Year's resolutions and like how do we orient and what are the things about growth in our lives, and the shoulds, right, that really show up. Like in order for me to live the most authentic life, or the whole life, or the glorious life, or the fabulous life, well, I should be doing these things, or like, well, how are they doing? Am I measuring up? Am I not measuring up? And how confusing that can be. And for me in this practice, there are ways of starting to disentangle myself from I think, immediate acceptance of that narrative, right? It's so easy to just slide in that direction. So I just wanted to start us off there, and we'll see.
I love the way that you immediately noticed what was happening, that you didn't allow it to carry you
Yeah,
further. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, because
yeah.
we could easily start talking ourselves into giving the should some validation.
Right, right.
Well, maybe I should. Well, maybe I should be.
Yeah. Or really, really fighting it. Like they're like, no, you're not. And it was actually a place of being present. And that's, so to me, that's also what this practice is really important for me in terms of being present. Because if we're not actually present, think about not being present and driving a car, right?
Yeah,
You need to be present.
like drunk driving.
Yeah, you need to. It's just regular. Like, is the person crossing the street? You need to be present to notice the person crossing the street. Is the light red or green? Is it a stop sign? And when we're not present, right? Sometimes not even about getting in an accident, but if we're not present, right, we're kind of in the routine of our mind. I don't know if you've experienced this, but There's a route that I would always drive, and if I'm not thinking, I start going that way, even if I'm trying to go somewhere else that
Yeah,
morning. Like,
yes.
wait a minute, I'm not going there this right. So but in that moment, we're not present about the decisions we make.
Yeah.
And so in that moment in the woods, I could be present with that narrative. It's like, oh, all right, let me sit with it. Let me just feel it. Let me not get lost in it, right? Not just kind of get lost in the story of what I should do about this story, even, but like, oh, and I was surprised. I mean, there wasn't like this intentionality, like I'm gonna go and be present and allow the feelings to come up, and I'll just let the tears come. Like there was none of that. It was like, oh, look what's happening. Let me be with what's happening.
Yes. And I think there's an importance too about whatever that narrative is, where is it coming from? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it coming from a place that is helpful, or is it coming from a place that has no real practical, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
it's coming from a different place of not really aligned with where you are. It's just, oh, there's this narrative. I'm gonna push this narrative. Somebody's pushing this narrative that you caught wind of, and you're like, oh. And I think the fact that you could sit and notice it, because I think it's important to notice, where is that coming from?
Mhm.
Like, what is that?
Mhm. Well, and it's hard because there's a lot of there's a lot of shoulds about productivity, about gaining
Oh,
accolades, about like I'm gonna rise to the top. I'm gonna be the shining bright and get all the likes and do all the things and get my bank and all. Right? And like you're saying, if we can't notice what's driving that, and let's just be curious about it and like, that what's best for me? Really? Is that really how I need to be right now? Who is that for? Or who is that serving? Um,
yeah.
and can I even? And for me, the biggest thing is, can I actually be present with whatever is happening before even deciding what I think that is or isn't? Like, feel it first
Hmm.
and be with it. And to me, there was a moment of like being like, it wasn't. I actually had to be with the sadness. I didn't. It wasn't about being with the shoulds or the not shoulds. It was like, oh, look what's arising. Like the sadness was kind of like, whoa, the eye. Is that tearing, or is it just like, are my eyes just watering because I'm outside and it's kind of breathing? No, that's a tear forming. All right, let me be with that. Oh, that's running enough to run down my face, right? Oh, that's crying in the woods. Okay, that can I allow myself to do that, right? Can I be just allow that without even the figuring out? It's like, oh, right, and no one's saying anything or doing anything. I'm just like, I'm all just sitting here quiet and look what. Oh, and then I could notice like, oh, here's the sadness, and I noticed the chatter of the shoulds, and I noticed the strength of where I am, and so I think that allowed me to be with the sadness in a different way that I normally wouldn't necessarily have been able to tune into. I probably could have tuned into like, oh, I really hear the shoulds, or I can really dismiss them, but allowing this other experience of that, and that it is really heartbreaking, right? And we don't allow. I mean, I'm not going to talk for anybody else, but like I certainly don't allow, more often than not, just that heartbreak to be present. That's hard, right? It is all kinds of joy, all kinds of suffering, right? And to like allow the heartbreak to arise and affect us and
Yeah.
not be worried about like, oh, I'm just gonna now am I just gonna be crying all the time every day and I'm gonna be a basket case because there's just so much pain in the world? No. But can I be with it when it does arise? And can I even create conditions that it's okay for it to arise? I probably would not have let that arise had I been leading something, right? Or, just on this column and like, oh, there's the tear. Let me like want to
I'm
show it
crying
bad.
with
Let me like
Babz.
tighten that up a little bit. I'll deal with it later, right? But that was a moment where it was okay. So we also have to allow ourselves and build into our lives the possibility of that. pause, the listening, presence. Just, oh, I got to run somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think the pause is the scary part for people because they don't know what to do in it. In my spiritual direction practice, to sit in silence with someone is unnerving.
Mm.
until they ease into it and they're like, oh, okay, I get it. But those first few times, it's like people want to chat a little bit because they don't know how to be quiet and still. And they think that I have to fill the space with language, words. And you're like, no, you can hear yourself. When you sit quietly, you can hear yourself. But they're not used to that. They're used to every minute of every day with some interaction with something, whether it's music, whether it's people talking to them, whether it's them watching TV, do you know what I mean? Like there's no time for silence.
For listening.
Yes.
And what I want to, it can certainly be scary. And I think that, a fundamental part of my own practice is that deep listening. And it means having, like, there was an anchor there also, right? It wasn't just like, okay, I'm just going to like pitch myself out into this like void of listening and like the feelings are just going to, overwhelm me. But, there was in the practice, and I think that's also important. Like there's an anchor, there's a stabilizing force to allow you to take more risk, to listen to yourself a little bit more, be without filling up the space, to look around and listen really to what's around you, to experience the physical sensations of, right, listening even physically, physiologically, what's going on in your body. Oh, there's this tightness or there's a jitteriness, like, oh, can I be present with that, right? There's almost like allowing ourselves to do its thing, and can we be aware of that? Can we be aware of ourselves? Can we listen to ourselves? Can we attend to that? And it's really important to have something that's an anchor, whether that's sitting with another person in the kind of that silent space where you're listening. And for me, very often, like therapy and healing is two people paying attention to one person.
Mm-hmm.
And offer that anchor, to offer the like, I'm going to make sure you're not going to just dissolve or spontaneously combust or explode, which is what the feelings can seem like. Right? Or like these other techniques, right? So different spiritual traditions, you're reading something, you're repeating something, but it's with the intention on creating this anchor to then let go a little bit more of, not to like read or say a thing to distract, but as like, oh, right here, there's my heart, right? Here's my breath. Here's, oh, these trees and this land, which is a lot older than me and has been here. So I can actually lean into that, or feeling into my ancestors who are really there for me. What is that practice? Or, a song, chant. Well, there are different things, or for some people, it's certain kinds of movement that they can, okay, I'm in this, I'm running. I have a dear friend of mine who loves to run, and like that's part of also her meditation and spiritual practice, is getting into that and moving, that embodied. There's this piece around that movement and being embodied that actually helps the chatter kind of go away, and she can be present in a different way.
I like that.
So it's
Yeah.
really finding that for yourself.
Yeah. I think too, that takes some effort too for folks to define, how they want to be in their quiet space, what that looks like for them. Like you don't have, there's no rule book to this. I mean, there's guides, but you get to determine.
There's no should.
Yeah, no. So if you feel like you want to cry in the woods, hey, there's woods. There's woods.
Well, and for me, I mean, this is this other piece is, we, as Black people in this country, as African heritage people in this country, we come from thousands of years of traditions of connecting to the divine through nature. And because of the generations where we were enslaved, being connected to nature was also being connected to pain. And so and then you have institutions that also kept Black and brown people away from being able to access nature. So it becomes this idea of like, well, those are like white spaces and people just going on these hikes or doing this thing or like swimming. And to like find out part of our liberation just as people is to find our way back to ways that our relationships with nature and with these forces is just helpful and good for us and can be that place of support. It's like, you've talked about going to the ocean, right? So the ocean is big and like super deep, right? And so like, that's why like, oh, what happens if I can connect with that and then in that connection, bring up the thing that is like a hot topic that I'm worried about? And what happens? What happens to my perspective and perception experience with that topic, right? It's less it's like you put your hand in front of your face, you can't see anything, can't see the universe, but like you put your hand way out in front of you and you're like, oh, there's just a little thing that's a part of this whole thing. But we get lost in the hand right in front of our faces and can't see that we're actually in a universe that is so much vaster than us.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we are meaningless, but there's this, we're the center of our lives and the center of the universe, and we are really not. Both of those are true.
I like that. Both of those are true.
Both of those are true. So let's can we practice that? Because it's not just a happening. Can we do a little bit today, right? It's like a day at a time. Can I do a thing today that's connected to my health and well-being, to my wholeness, to what it even means to be a person? Can I allow curiosity into that, expansiveness into that? Maybe there's a way to be that is different than what I think it is. It's larger, more encompassing, more expansive, or allows more of myself to be experienced, first of all by me, and then by the world. Can I experience more of myself? Can I do that a little bit today? If I can, wonderful. And maybe tomorrow, and then it's tomorrow. Okay, can I be present with it? Wonderful. And just keep showing up for yourself. Keep showing up for the depth of also what this life can hold.
That's a good message. That's a good way. I wish we could be talking to young people like this. Like I wish there was like a whole session where young people can sort of sit and have these kinds of conversations. Not just young people. I say young people because I see kids struggling with so much, right? Like the weight, just so much. But I see older people too. So
I had no shortage of clients from the older people. It's not like us older people got it together and somehow they got to catch the young folks up. But I think that it's just something for everybody. I mean, that's
yeah.
like if more adults were not lost or freer, or however you want to frame it, then we raise and create culture and experiences that nourish and nurture our young people, as well as like care for our elders, right? And if just the young people, we're just going to focus on the young people, well then like we're still creating systems that oppress and say no. So that's the both and there isn't one answer. Can we all, can people who are listening, when you interact with young people, treat them like people? Like, first of all, like just try that. Not like I'm the one and you just need to do what I say, because like, you don't necessarily treat other adults like that.
No. I mean, some people do, but
right. That's why adults need we need help and work, and holding and compassion for adults too. Like we don't have this figured out. There's a lot that's in the way. There's a lot that's in the way just by being a person, and then there's a lot that's these systems which aren't really about, school systems are not really about learning, really. All of these measurements and markers to hit proof of something. But it's not like, how do we encourage learning and the love of like learning and exploration, and who are you and how do we help you to grow and unfold to then be a wonderful person, and you being a wonderful person will naturally help to create a wonderful culture and a wonderful society. That's not the role of education, not what public education is doing, not even what private education is doing, aiming towards a certain thing.
Hmm. Wow, that's pretty prolific.
We get that you crying in the woods, systems of education, and what are we really doing, right? These are
but ultimately that's it though, right? Like that's the ultimate question. What are you really doing?
what are we really doing?
What are we really doing?
What are we doing with this precious life that we have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That really is the ultimate question. That's the ultimate question. Because you've been given it, then what are you going to do with it?
Yeah. And what are we going to do? Not just like, what am I going to do in my own precious life? Because I'm interconnected, but that is also connected with like, how do we as communities, what is this precious community, like this precious time that we have, I'm in relationship with all of these things. So what am I doing in that relationship? Helping to grow.
And we get reminders to ask this question all the time. I think that's what death calls us to examine. Like, okay, let me remind you.
Right. The clock is ticking.
Yes. So when you hear somebody passing that, you're like, oh, and you're, I'm always jolted, particularly when it's people that I know, like I know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I have to be reminded that,
this is not a theory, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the theory of death, like, existential death, right? Someday this part of myself will end and something new will. No, this is, this who I've invested so much in, right? This little body, this little being, right, is not going to be living.
Yeah, that it has an end.
Experience is going to be like.
It has an end. Yeah, and I think that is part of sitting in the pause and like, okay, I don't know if you could stay in the pause all the time. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just suggesting that, you take a little inventory, you ask the big question and you see where you could, answer it if you can for yourself.
I mean, I think that we are in this culture so habituated not to pause and listen. Right? It's like healing, right? The purpose isn't like, oh, I just got to keep healing. Is we got to live, right? But there are things in the way of that, right? And so the pause helps us to like, ooh, there's a whole different way of being than the shoulds, right? Than the you better and you gotta and this is what it's about and get your hustle on and all the things. Oh, maybe there's something else here also. If I don't pause, if I don't listen, if I'm not present, then I can't adjust. Can't move. It's just like, oh, this culture is saying this is what I'm supposed to do, is what the norm is, what success means. I guess we gotta do the thing. And like, well, is that really what I want? Is that is that good for me? Is that good for me and my family, my loved one, my people, like whoever, like, maybe that's, there was a lot of shoulds. We go, right? Jim Crow, slavery, right? We got these systems that like, this is what success means for Black people. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's something different, right? Which means an internal piece to allow, but also like bumping up against real external structures. Shifting of like, what am I going to spend my time and my energy on? What am I going to feed? What am I going to nourish? What am I going to listen to? What am I going to question? What am I going to be curious about? Can all that be present while, I got to like make breakfast? You know? Yeah. Can I be present, right? While I'm doing a thing with the people who are there and not thinking like, well, this is just I'm just doing this to get on the way to the real thing.
Yeah. Yes. That's pretty powerful to point out.
Maybe there's some value in the like, oh, here we are now. It's this start of this new year, talking to each other here, fabulous Babz, Harry, helping to coordinate, listen to things, right? This is a particular time and a particular moment. Being able to do this with Jage, the particular things, and be present with it. Particular people listening, where they're at, what is resonating, what's landing, what's not.
Yeah. I like that. Be here now. Not a famous quote, be here now. So hard to do.
So hard
Or
to
at least for some, hard to do.
Yeah, it's not easy. Let's
No, being present, because we all are guilty of what you just said. I'm in this thing, but the other thing over there is more important. So this is just a pass through.
Yeah.
I'm doing this now because I got to get over there, but I'm not really present here because I need to be more present. I'm gonna be present over there when I get over there.
Right.
Oh,
That's important over there. Huh.
yeah.
And maybe we can practice, because if we don't have practice being present, we can't all of a sudden turn it on when we're over there.
Yeah.
When we get over there, then it's like, oh yeah, okay, here I am. Oh, but what's the next thing? I got to make sure that this is leading to the next thing, because that, right?
I tell you what I used to do. This is what taught me how to be present. Because I used to get in my car and have to go somewhere, and I'd be so focused on where I had to go that I would be in my car trying to get to where I had to go. And I remember sitting at a stoplight and saying, I just need to be in this car. I'm in this car. I took a deep breath and I exhaled. I was like, okay, I'm in the car. Like I'm in the car. Because I could get in the car and swear to God, I've done this. I've gotten in the car and can't remember how I got to the place I was going because I was so focused on the going. Like, oh. And I didn't like that feeling. And I would do it with food. I would do it with so many things.
Right.
And I started like, oh, I'm not present for anything. I'm just going to the next thing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I can't remember what I ate last night. I just ate because I needed to eat. I didn't pay attention to what I was eating. Do you know what I mean? Like, so now I'm very deliberate and intentional about how I pay attention and be present and show up and listen to people and be with people, Because
if we're not, all of a sudden we find ourselves, oh, look how much time has just flown by.
Yes.
Or something like big transitions, death, big things happen. It's like, oh, where I missed it. Now I got to pay attention. What have I been doing the last whatever years, right? And the people in those moments you can't be present with because you're moving, right? You're just like, oh, we're going somewhere else. We're on the way.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm so happy to start this new year with this. I didn't want the year to go deep into without setting some, foundational things with you.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, Babz. Really appreciate
I am so grateful. Thank you so much for your commitment of this time. I appreciate you.
Oh, well, I appreciate you and being able to do this and just to share these thoughts and experiences and perspectives, and it's a real joy and a real gift. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening.
Yes, he'll be back because he's a regular. He's gonna be back. So y'all look out for it. Thank you, Harry, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Happy New Year all.
Hi, this is Babz Rawls Ivy from New Haven, Connecticut, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM, streaming live at newhavenindependent.org.